Every morning, millions of people do the same small thing without thinking twice. They shower, get dressed, swipe something under their arms, and walk out the door expecting to smell clean and acceptable to everyone. It feels normal now, but for most of human history, there was no deodorant stick or roll-on, no spray can sitting in a bathroom cabinet waiting to solve the problem in 5 seconds. If you like stories that make ordinary things feel completely different, subscribe now. Because this one starts with a problem every human being has had, but almost nobody had an easy way to deal with for thousands of years. The problem was not sweat itself. Sweat is natural. Your body makes it to cool you down. The real trouble begins when bacteria on the skin break down the sweat, producing the smell we know so well today. That means the thing people wanted to stop was not simply moisture, it was the social damage that smell could cause. Embarrassment, discomfort, judgments from other people, the fear that someone might notice before you do. But that fear did not always look the way it does now. In the ancient world, many societies understood cleanliness as something important, even if they did not have modern chemistry or plumbing. People in places like ancient Egypt used scented oils and washed regularly when water and custom allowed it. Fragrant plants, resins, and oils mattered a great deal. In hot climates, smell was not some tiny issue people ignored. It was part of daily life, managed with bathing, oils, incense, and clean fabrics as often as possible. Still, none of that was modern deodorant, targeting underarm odor with a specialized product. Instead, people approached the problem from the outside. Wash the body, change the clothing, apply scent. Stay as fresh as you can for as long as you can. That was the basic system for a very long time. And clothing mattered more than many people realize. Long before modern synthetic fabrics, people often wore linen close to the skin. Linen could absorb sweat and could be washed more easily than heavier outer garments. That made it a quiet but important weapon in the fight against odor. A person might not be able to wash every layer they owned all the time, but if the inner layer caught the sweat, the smell could be reduced before it spread through the outer clothing. In other words, people were often managing body odor through fabric and laundry, not through skin products. That sounds simple, but it also tells you something important. Before deodorant, odor control was usually indirect. Bathing helped when it was possible. Clean underclothes helped. Perfume helped cover what could not be removed. Herbs might be rubbed into the body or tucked into clothing. Scented powders were also used to absorb excess body moisture. In some times and places, people used rosewater, lavender, rosemary, citrus, myrtle, or other strong-smelling plant materials. These did not stop the body from sweating. They did not kill all odor-causing bacteria in the way modern products try to. They simply pushed back as best they could against a completely natural human process. And even then, results were uneven. The wealthy had obvious advantages. If you had servants, spare clothing, regular access to water, imported oils, and fine linen, you had more ways to stay pleasant-smelling than someone doing hard labor in rough clothes under the sun. Ultimately, that gap mattered. Smell was never only about hygiene. It was also about money, work, climate, and access. A nobleman in a cool stone building, changing shirts and using scented oils, lived in a different world from a laborer sweating through the same garment day after day. That is one reason it can be misleading to imagine the past as one single smelly blur. People did not all live the same way. Some bathed often, some rarely could. Some had access to fragrant materials, some had almost none. Some lived in crowded cities where smells piled on top of each other. Others lived in rural places where bodies were still sweaty. But the air itself was less packed with smoke, waste, animals, and human closeness. There is another twist here too. People in the past did not always think about smell in the same way modern people do. Today, body odor is often treated like a personal failure. It feels like proof that someone did not prepare properly. But in earlier times, smell was just one part of a world full of strong scents. Streets smelled, animals smelled, work smelled. Homes smelled of smoke, food, damp cloth, leather, and waste. Human odor was not floating alone in some clean, sterile environment. It lived inside a much louder world of smells. That did not mean people liked it. It meant standards were different, and the whole environment changed what counted as normal. A person walking through a Roman bath complex, a medieval market street, or an early modern workshop would have experienced a world far more intense than a modern office elevator. That matters because the need for deodorant, as we understand it now, depends partly on comparison. The cleaner and more controlled the background environment becomes, the more noticeable one human body can seem. Odor becomes sharper when everything around it is quieter. So what did people use before deodorant? The honest answer is not one product. It was a whole collection of habits. They washed when they could. They changed linen. They used scented oils and perfumes. They rubbed herbs into the skin. They applied powders. They aired out clothes. They relied on loose garments in some climates and layered garments in others. They accepted a level of natural smell that would bother many modern people while still trying in their own ways to reduce it. They did not have a neat little stick designed by a lab and sold in a plastic tube. They had routines, workarounds, and hope. And sometimes that hope was doing a lot of the work, because covering odor is not the same as preventing it. A strong perfume on an unwashed body did not erase the problem. It often sat on top of it. A fresh shirt helped, but only until the next long day of heat and labor. Powders could dry the skin for a while, but they were not magic. Most old solutions were partial, temporary, better than nothing, but never perfect. Would you have trusted a few drops of scented oil and a clean linen shirt to get you through an entire day in the heat? That question brings us to the next part of the story, because once you start looking closely, odor control stops being a simple matter of washing up. It becomes a story about class, crowded cities, changing fashion, and the uncomfortable truth that some people had far more protection from this problem than others. Once you move past the basic question of how people dealt with odor, the story gets more revealing. The answer was never just about cleanliness, it was also about status, fashion, climate, medicine, and the simple fact that some people could afford protection from discomfort while others had to live much closer to it. In the ancient world, some civilizations had routines that would seem surprisingly familiar. Egyptians are a strong example. Cleanliness mattered deeply in daily life, religion, and appearance. Oils, perfumes, and scented substances were not rare little extras used only on special occasions. They were part of a larger culture that connected smell with order, beauty, and self-control. Men and women used perfumed oils on the skin, and some sources describe cone-shaped lumps of scented fat or wax, worn on the head during banquets, slowly melting in the heat and releasing fragrance. It sounds strange now, but the logic was simple. If life is hot, crowded, and physical, scent becomes part of how you manage the body. The Greeks and Romans also cared strongly about bathing, grooming, and fragrance. Public baths did more than clean the skin. They served as social spaces, routine spaces, even status spaces. People scraped sweat and oil from the skin with tools called strigils, then applied fresh oils afterward. This did not work like a modern deodorant, but it did reflect something very important. In some societies, odor was managed through repeated body care and public routines, not hidden away as a private embarrassment solved in a sealed bathroom. But these habits were never universal, and they did not remain consistent across time. In parts of medieval and early modern Europe, bathing culture changed. Not everywhere, and not all at once, but enough to reshape daily habits. Public baths declined in some regions. Medical ideas shifted. Water itself was treated with suspicion, as people believed warm bathing opened pores to disease. Crowded cities and weak sanitation made full-body washing harder than many modern viewers might imagine. If the bath is distant or costly, people start solving the smell problem in other ways. Clothing became vital. Many wore linen closest to the skin because it could absorb sweat and could be cleaned more easily than wool. Washing the body every day might not happen. Washing the shirt or chemise was often more practical, serving as a barrier between skin and the world. It caught moisture and slowed the spread of smell. It bought time. That does not sound glamorous, but for centuries it was one of the smartest odor control systems people had. And then there was perfume. Perfume could be pleasant, useful, and impressive, but it also told you who had money. Fine scents were not evenly distributed across society. Imported ingredients cost money. Distillation, storage, and trade added cost. A wealthy household could buy perfumes, scented gloves, pomanders filled with fragrant material, sachets tucked into clothing, and luxury soaps. A poor laborer had fewer choices, maybe herbs, maybe strong soap if it was available, maybe a wash basin and a clean underlayer if luck and income allowed it. So when people imagine the past as if everyone smelled the same, they miss how unequal the situation really was. A merchant, a courtier, a farm worker, and a dock laborer were not all working with the same tools. One person could cover odor with imported rose or citrus oils. Another could only hope yesterday's shirt had dried out enough to wear again. That is not just a difference in comfort, it is a difference in dignity. Fashion made the problem even more complicated. Heavy garments, multiple layers, tight sleeves, wigs, cosmetics, and richly decorated clothing could all trap heat and scent. The more cloth a society wrapped around the body, the harder it could be to stay fresh through a full day. And yet fashion itself often demanded those layers, especially among the upper classes. So the same people who had the best access to perfumes and fine fabrics were sometimes also trapped inside the most elaborate systems of dress. They had better tools, but they were also fighting a problem partly created by their own social world. That sounds strange now, but it made sense at the time. There was another layer to all this. Smell was tied to ideas about health and morality. In many periods, people did not separate odor, sickness, and social worth as neatly as modern people try to. Bad smells could be linked to bad air, corruption, filth, poverty, or danger. Even before anyone understood bacteria in a modern scientific way, many people already suspected that foul-smelling places were unhealthy places. They were not completely wrong. Their explanations were often off, but their instincts were not foolish. Rot, waste, and stagnant air really did go hand in hand with disease and poor living conditions, even if the exact mechanism was misunderstood. As cities grew, this became harder to ignore. In small rural communities, smell could disperse more easily. Life was still physical, still sweaty, still dirty in many ways, but urban crowding changed the scale of the problem. More people packed into smaller spaces, more animals. More waste, more workshops, more smoke, more shared rooms, more public contact. Suddenly, odor was not just something a household managed privately. It became part of dense social life. The closer strangers lived and worked together, the more smell became something noticed, judged, and remembered. And that pressure sharpened the role of class even more. The wealthy could withdraw from the worst city smells into larger homes, private rooms, fresh fabrics, and expensive scents. Poorer people often lived in the thick of it. That meant body odor was not simply a biological fact, it was also shaped by infrastructure. Water access mattered, laundry mattered, housing mattered, ventilation mattered. Time mattered too. Someone working long hours at physical labor had fewer chances to refresh than someone with servants and spare clothing. Even the ability to rest in the shade or avoid certain jobs could change how a person smelled by evening. Do you think people in the past noticed body odor less, or did they simply live in a world where almost everything smelled stronger? That question matters because modern people often assume deodorant became necessary the moment humans became bothered by odor. But the truth is slower and more complicated. For a very long time, people did not stop smell at the source. They managed it with washing, fabrics, herbs, powders, and perfume, and those tools were shaped by wealth and daily conditions. Some methods worked reasonably well, others mostly created a scented layer over a deeper problem. And that deeper problem was waiting for a new kind of answer. Because once modern cities, modern consumer culture, and modern chemistry began to develop, covering odor no longer seemed like enough. People wanted a product that could target the body itself more directly. That was the real turning point, and it would not come from ancient perfume jars or bundles of dried herbs. It would come from laboratories, patents, and a new idea. Maybe smell was not something to hide. Maybe it was something to engineer away. For centuries, people had been fighting odor from the outside. They washed, they changed clothes. They used perfume, herbs, powders, oils, and whatever else their time and money allowed. But all of those methods had the same weakness. They treated the result, not the source. The smell might be covered, reduced, or delayed, yet the body kept doing what bodies do. Sweat came back, heat came back, bacteria came back, and with them came the same old problem. The real change began when modern industry started turning private discomfort into a product category. By the late 19th century, the industrial world was producing more than machines and steel. It was producing new kinds of personal goods, packaged and sold to solve small everyday frustrations. People were increasingly surrounded by branded soaps, tooth powders, hair tonics, creams, and patent remedies. Once a culture starts buying products for grooming, it becomes easier to imagine one more item added to the routine. That opened the door for something different from perfume or soap, a product aimed specifically at underarm odor. One of the earliest known commercial deodorants appeared in the United States in the late 1880s. It was sold under the name Mum, and unlike modern sticks or sprays, it was closer to a cream or paste that had to be applied by hand. That detail matters because it reminds us how unfamiliar this category still was. People were not pulling a neat plastic tube from a bag. They were dipping fingers into a substance and rubbing it into the underarm. Effective or not, this was not yet smooth, elegant, or especially pleasant. Still, the idea itself was new and powerful. Instead of masking odor after it developed, a deodorant could try to reduce the conditions that caused it. That did not mean early formulas were sophisticated by modern standards. Some products relied on antiseptic ingredients meant to reduce the bacteria that created smell. In plain language, the logic was simple. If odor grows when bacteria break down sweat, then reducing those bacteria should reduce the smell. This was a far more targeted approach than simply pouring fragrance on the skin and hoping for the best. But deodorant was only half of the modern story. The other half was antiperspirant, and this is where people often confuse two different ideas. A deodorant is designed to deal with odor. An antiperspirant is designed to reduce sweat itself, usually by using aluminum-based compounds that temporarily block sweat ducts near the surface of the skin. One targets the smell, the other targets the moisture. Many modern products do both, which is why the distinction gets blurry now. In the early years, though, this difference was much more important because the products were still evolving and often did one job better than the other. One of the early antiperspirants that gained attention in the early 20th century was Evertree. It was more aggressive than a simple fragrance-based solution. It aimed to stop sweating, not just soften the social consequences of it. That sounds like exactly what embarrassed customers should have wanted. But there was a problem. Early antiperspirants could be unpleasant to use. Some irritated the skin badly. Some damaged fabric. Some were awkward to apply. A person might solve one kind of discomfort only to create another. Would you keep using a product that reduced sweat if it also stung your skin or ruined your shirt? That question helps explain why invention alone did not create instant mass adoption. The chemistry existed before the habit did. People had to be convinced that the trouble, irritation, cost, and embarrassment were worth it. And embarrassment mattered more than people might expect. Today, deodorant is discussed openly in advertisements, stores, and locker rooms. In the early years, body odor was a much harder topic to name directly. It sat in an awkward space between medicine, manners, and shame. Companies had to sell a solution to a problem many customers did not want mentioned in public. That made packaging and wording incredibly important. A product could not simply shout, "You smell bad." It had to move carefully, hinting at freshness, charm, confidence, or personal neatness. At first, growth was slow. That is not surprising. New habits take time, especially when they involve parts of the body people prefer to treat as private. Soap already had a clear place in daily life. Perfume had a long social tradition. But underarm deodorant was different. It asked people to admit that ordinary washing might not be enough. It asked them to think about the body in a more technical way, almost like a maintenance problem. For many people, that was a new and slightly uncomfortable way of thinking. The broader world was helping push things in that direction. Industrial cities were expanding, offices and department stores were growing. Public transportation packed strangers closer together. Fashion exposed different parts of the body at different times. Social life placed new pressure on self-presentation. In that setting, odor did not need to be extreme to become a source of anxiety. It only needed to be noticeable in a quieter, more controlled, modern environment. This is where deodorant stopped being just a chemical idea and became part of modern identity. A cream in a jar may not sound revolutionary, but the deeper shift was enormous. For the first time, a growing number of people were being offered the promise that body odor was not merely something to live with or cover up. It was a manageable flaw, a preventable one, a problem that could be handled before anyone else noticed. That promise gave deodorant real power, even before the formulas became convenient. Over time, the products improved, application became cleaner, containers improved. Formulas became more stable and easier to use. The category slowly moved away from hand-applied creams and harsh treatments toward forms that felt more practical and normal. But in the early phase, deodorant and antiperspirant still belonged to the strange borderland between medicine cabinet and grooming table. They were not yet universal. They were experimental, slightly awkward and loaded with social meaning. That is what makes this moment such an important turning point. For thousands of years, odor control had mostly been about routine and environment: bathing, laundry, fabric, perfume, and luck. Now a new idea had arrived. Chemistry could step between the body and the social consequences of the body. A private human process could be interrupted, managed, and sold back as convenience. But having the product was not enough to make it a daily ritual in almost every home. The formulas existed. The patents existed. The jars and liquids existed. What had not fully arrived yet was the modern belief that every respectable person should use them. That belief would take something even more powerful than chemistry. It would take advertising, social pressure, and a new kind of fear built around being noticed by other people. By the early 20th century, the chemistry behind deodorants and antiperspirants already existed. The products were real. They could be bought. Some people used them. But that still did not mean deodorant was a normal part of daily life. An invention can sit on a shelf for years without changing the world. For that to happen, people have to believe they need it. That was the real turning point in the history of deodorant. The biggest change did not come from a laboratory breakthrough alone. It came from a shift in how companies taught people to think about their own bodies. For most of history, body odor had been one problem among many in a world full of strong smells. Now advertisers began treating it as a private social emergency. They turned a natural bodily function into something that could damage romance, friendship, work, and status. In other words, they did not just sell deodorant, they sold fear of being noticed. This worked because the modern world was already moving in that direction. Cities were growing. Offices were filling with clerks, salespeople, secretaries, and managers working close together indoors. Department stores and public transit put strangers side by side in ways earlier generations had experienced less often. Social life was changing too. More interactions happened in enclosed spaces where smell did not disappear into open air. Clothing styles shifted. Expectations around neatness and self-presentation became stricter. When daily life brings bodies physically closer together while the environment itself becomes cleaner, small traces of human odor stand out more sharply. That made deodorant easier to market. But marketing still had to overcome one big obstacle. People did not enjoy talking openly about underarm smell. The topic was embarrassing, so advertisers had to build a language around it, one that felt urgent without always being direct. Some of the most influential early campaigns aimed at women first. That is a revealing detail. Advertisers understood that women were already under enormous pressure to appear pleasant, polished, and socially acceptable. A campaign could suggest, without saying too much, that one hidden flaw might damage a woman's chances in love, friendship, or public life. The message was not only about odor, it was about rejection, about being judged without realizing it, about losing opportunities for reasons no one would explain to your face. That kind of appeal could be extremely powerful. A famous example came from campaigns connected to products like Odor, which used copywriting that leaned hard on embarrassment and anxiety. The ads did not need to accuse every reader directly. They simply planted an idea. Maybe the reason people are keeping their distance has nothing to do with your personality. Maybe it is something you cannot see. Maybe it is your body. Once that thought is in a person's mind, a product stops being optional. It starts to feel protective. That strategy may sound harsh, but it worked because it matched a deeper transformation already underway. Modern consumer culture was learning to identify everyday insecurities and attach products to them. Toothpaste was sold through fresh breath and attractiveness. Mouthwash was framed as protection against social failure. Soap was connected to refinement and respectability. Deodorant fit perfectly into that new world. It was not sold simply as a hygiene aid. It was sold as insurance against humiliation. Men were pulled into the market more strongly later, especially as office work, business culture, and mass advertising expanded further. At first, some deodorant campaigns focused more on women, because social expectations around femininity and presentation were so intense. But once the habit was established and the product category matured, men became an obvious target too. Cleanliness, confidence, professionalism, and athletic freshness could all be turned into selling points. Before long, avoiding body odor was no longer framed as a feminine concern. It became a general rule of respectable modern life. That is one reason deodorant became so deeply normal. It crossed from fashion into discipline. Think about how different that is from older odor control methods. Perfume had long been a luxury or style choice. A scented oil could signal taste, wealth, or ritual. Even frequent bathing, where possible, was still just one part of a broader routine. Deodorant changed the meaning of odor control. It told people that not managing underarm smell was not merely unfortunate. It was careless, even inconsiderate. That moral edge helped make the product powerful. Once society treats a bodily issue as a sign of self-control, people begin policing themselves without needing to be told twice. And advertisers were not working alone. Modern infrastructure helped them. Bathrooms became more common and more private. Packaged consumer goods became easier to distribute widely. Drugstores, department stores, and later supermarkets made personal care products part of ordinary shopping. Manufacturing improved, containers became better. Roll-ons, sprays, gels, and sticks made application cleaner and faster. A product that had once been awkward and irritating could now be used in seconds before work or school. Convenience turned social pressure into habit. There is something almost invisible about that process once it succeeds. A modern person does not usually wake up and think, "I am performing a century-old consumer ritual." Shaped by urban life, advertising psychology, class expectations, and changing ideas about the body, they think, "I need deodorant." That simplicity is the victory. The routine becomes so ordinary that the history disappears. But the history still matters because it changes how we see the object. Deodorant was not inevitable. Humans did not move in a straight line from bad smells to a perfect underarm stick. For thousands of years, people handled odor with bathing, fabrics, herbs, oils, powders, and perfumes. Then chemistry offered a more focused solution. Then advertising transformed that solution into a daily necessity. The modern product sitting in a bathroom cabinet is the end result of all three layers: biology, invention, and social pressure. And that final layer may be the most important of all. Sweat is not a flaw. It is a normal part of being alive. Odor is not a moral failure. It is a result of how bodies and bacteria interact. Yet, modern life has wrapped those natural facts in a strong set of expectations. We live closer together, we work in cleaner spaces, we judge each other faster, we buy products that promise control. Deodorant became successful because it matched a world that wanted the body to be managed, quiet, and socially neutral. So what did people use before deodorant? They used what they had: baths, clean linen, perfume, powders, oils, herbs, and the acceptance that a human body was never going to smell like nothing at all. Modern deodorant changed the scale of that desire, turning it into a routine most people never stop to question. That is what makes this ordinary little product so revealing. It is not just about scent. It is about cities, class, anxiety, chemistry, manners, and the long effort to make the human body fit the rules of modern life. If this changed how you look at your bathroom routine, like the video and subscribe. Tell me in the comments which everyday object you want to trace backward next, because some of the most revealing stories in history are hiding in the most ordinary places.